Except for about a year in the 1800s, debt has been a constant. It's now approaching a staggering $20 trillion. President Trump is reportedly working on a skinny budget that will reduce federal spending by $10 trillion over 10 years, but he's also called for some increases in spending. Scott Thuman takes a look at a pending budget battle.
We've got to get the spending under control, and we hope the administration will also begin to make this a high priority as well.
Mark Walker heads the House Republican Study Committee, a coalition of conservative lawmakers and made up of some serious deficit hawks.
Many of the members who are now serving had that part of their platform in running for the United States Congress. It's something that's crucial.
Walker's caucus includes Tea Party Republicans who rode to office in the 2010 midterm elections.
There you go. Let's go.
Campaigning for a rejection of President Obama's $800 billion stimulus bill. One of them, Mick Mulvaney, is on track to be the next director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Choosing Mick Mulvaney as OMB director was the strongest message that fiscal responsibility is important. To me, that laid down a huge line from this administration saying that we're going to make fiscal responsibility a high priority. I have full confidence in Mick and hope he gets past Senate confirmation.
But President Trump campaigned on promises to cut taxes and spend more.
We're cutting taxes for the middle class, and I will tell you, we are cutting a big league for the middle class. We are going to fix our inner cities and rebuild our highways, bridges, tunnels, airports, schools, hospitals. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure.
I am worried. I am worried because I think a lot of promises were made in the campaign that have big price tags with them. We have overpromised, we have overborrowed. We need to deal with that first.
Maya McGinnis leads a bipartisan group that studies U.S. fiscal policy. She says Trump's proposals would add another $5 trillion to the debt.
The question is, what policies, spending cuts, entitlement reforms, or new revenues is our political system willing to talk about? Because the truth is, and voters know this, politicians aren't coming clean about this. They're not talking about these tough choices at all.
You can't just say, oh, we're going to cut back government spending, we'll balance the budget, and don't worry, the private sector will fill that gap. I don't see that story as making sense.
Economist Dean Baker disagrees on debt. He thinks spending cuts could bring worse damage to the economy.
It's very hard to see how the debt is negatively impacting our standard of living now. I would argue it's positively impacting it, and that's creating demand in the economy. And if we didn't have that demand from the budget deficit, then we'd have fewer jobs, less growth.
But in a new administration, political reality may force some degree of fiscal reality.
I think one of the things that the president has looked at is not just the cutting side, but the revenue stream. In one area in particular, natural resources, regulation and tax reform, how we can grow the economy and bring in additional revenues to the government on the revenue side. So there is a balance to how the president's looking at bringing down the deficit.
One pending clash could come between the president and his own party. Over half of the federal budget is spent on two programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and will take an act of Congress to change it.
We can save Medicare, but we have to reform it.
House Speaker Paul Ryan has spent years talking about reform, but he's up against a president who has promised there will be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. And even with a Republican president and a Republican Congress, nothing can fuel a Washington fight like a battle over the budget.
Ultimately, we have to remember that as the legislative branch that we are the ones in charge of the purse. There may come a time, but to kind of guess or speculate, I think it's a little early to tell, but ultimately we do have the fiscal responsibility in the House.
And the first clash between this administration and Congress could come in March. That's when Congress has to decide whether or not to vote to raise the debt limit. In other words, the amount of money the government can borrow or risk defaulting on the payments it owes. Sharyl?
All right, Scott Thuman, thanks.